So today we're continuing our journey with Nuxt 3, and we want to get ourselves set up in a position where we can help ourselves as much as we can and make our coding life as good as it can be. So today we're talking about some code assistance tools that we want to get set up correctly for use with Nuxt 3 and Visual Studio Code. So we're specifically talking about code formatting to produce nice, easy to read code, and code linting to help us pick up and fix common issues that we might have with our code. So let's go and get these set up. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, whenever it is that I find you. So here we are in our tutorial project with our Nuxt 3 application that we set up in the previous tutorial. And what we want to go and do is start adding Prettier into this so that we can auto format our code. At the moment, if we go into a component, for instance, and I start editing around and moving things all over the show, when I save the file, it stays exactly like that. So that's not a great position to start with. So we want that to auto format when we save. So let's just close that out. So the first thing that we need is to add a configuration file for Prettier into our Nuxt app. So let's go and add a new file called Prettier RC, and it's a JSON file. And this just contains the configuration that we want Prettier to actually use. So I am asking for semicolons not to be used, for single quotes to be used instead of double quotes, a tab width of 2, and I want you to indent the script and style in Vue components. So that's it, nothing too sinister there, and as you can see that's already not formatting as well, but we'll get back to that. So let's add another file just to protect ourselves from Prettier. We need a file called Prettier ignore, or .prettier ignore actually. So let's go and put that in there. And I'm just going to paste in again a whole load of stuff. And I got this from my Nuxt 2 project. Here you can add in whatever it is that you want for your particular project. So we're ignoring anything with star.pid, for example, any coverage files, etc., etc. So Prettier will ignore all of those and not auto format them. So we've now got both of those in place. What we need to do is actually go and tell VS Code that we want to use Prettier. So let's create a settings file for VS Code in the VS Code folder. Settings, never going to work. Settings.json, and what we can do in the settings is basically tell it the files that we want to take notice of, or that we want Visual Studio Code to be interested in. And I need to wrap that in an object as well. So let me just tidy this up quickly. Now it's happy. So I'm telling it to take notice of TypeScript, JavaScript, JSON, and Markdown, Vue, HTML. And I'm telling it the formatter that I want it to use is Prettier. I'm asking it that whenever I save a file, I want it to format. And I'm also asking it that when I save, I want it to run and fix any linting issues. So we'll come back to that one. So for now, with that saved and in place, if I came back over to this JSON here and resave this, you should see now that Visual Studio Code on save automatically starts formatting that to my Prettier rules. So I get 2 spaces. So that shows that that settings file is working and that Prettier is now working for us, at least for JSON files. We've proved that. While we're in the settings file, I am also going to just add in some other settings. So I'm going to add in a specific one for C#. So that's for when I get to doing my C# API. And again, I'm going to format on save, but this time I'm going to use a different formatter because it's a different language. So I want to not use Prettier for that. And by default, I'm going to select that I want Prettier to be used, but I'm not going to elect to format on save or do any code actions on save. So this is for anything that's not in that list of files above up here, just so that I don't go messing up any code files or anything that I really don't understand anything about. I don't want any linting going on and changing code, that kind of thing, or changing any formatting for those sorts of files. That's just my personal preference. You can set yours to whatever you like. Now that I've got that, I should be able to go over to, for instance, a Vue component. And here you can see I tweaked around with that. If I now save that, what we see is that Prettier, and if I was to just put some constant in here and save that, it's not indenting the script like I asked it to. So back over in our Prettier config again, just to remind ourselves, I asked it to indent the view and the style. The script and the style, they're not indented. So what I'm going to do is split. In fact, I'm just going to copy that block, and I'm going to get rid of everything except the view element, and I'm going to take out the view element from that particular block up there. Save that. Prettier formats the JSON okay, and then come back over to here, make a change in here and save that. And we now see that Prettier is now indenting that. Why? That is just bonkers to me, but anyway, it should work in VS Code, but clearly doesn't. So that's just a little gotcha there. Make sure that you have the view file type on its own setting. If anyone knows why and wants to post in the comments, then please do, because I'm curious as to why that doesn't work. But anyway, that's got my view style and scripting being indented the way that I want it to. So let's get rid of that because I don't need it, and close that out. And that is Prettier all up and running now. So that's all of our files going to be prettified. So let's move on and talk about linting. We need to start adding the linter into our project, and to do that we do our usual. In fact, I ought to come into the Nuxt app folder before I do that, and we install this in our development tools. So let's just install ESlint. It's not installed in VS Code like Prettier is by default, so we have to actually go and add it into our project. So we'll let that install, but while that's doing that, we can do like we did with Prettier, and we have to add a new file to ignore files that we don't want linted. So that is a .ESlint ignore file, and in there just going to paste in some things like the dist folder, the node modules folder. We obviously don't want any of those folders linted because they're all generated ones or ones where we put output. Also any CSS, I don't want those linted. I know what I'm doing with those. They're simple enough, and any bat files or anything else that I might have going on. So you can always add to this as you go through, and you add files into your project that you suddenly find showing up in the linter that you don't want. So that ignores all of those files. I'm also going to add a task or a script into the package JSON. So as well as all of those tasks that we've got, I'm going to add a task of lint, which basically runs the linter, but only on JS, JSON, Markdown, Vue, and TypeScript files from the current folder downwards. So we would run that inside of our Nuxt app, and that will lint only those specific file extensions. So let's just save that for now. And what we also need is a configuration file, much like we did with Prettier as well. Both of these tools follow a very similar pattern. So let's create a .ESlint rc JSON file that's going to contain, again, some JSON configuration. So root, we're just saying that this is the root of our linting. So when we hit this particular file, we don't need to go up any further directories. And I'm saying by default I want the ESlint recommended rules to be applied. That's the rule set that will get applied to your code base. Back over to settings again. I'm going to add in a couple more properties. As we already showed, we've got ESlint fix all being run whenever we save a file. So that will run through the rules and try to fix what it can automatically for you to avoid any silly mistakes. What I'm going to add in here is an ESlint always show status, which basically adds a little icon down here. You'll see when I save it, like I've got the Prettier one here, it adds an ESlint icon into the status bar. And I'm also telling ESlint which files I want validated automatically. So as I open them, Visual Studio Code will automatically run the linter on these types of files for me and show me any problems that I've got with them. So again, the same kind of files that we have typically with a Nuxt project are JavaScript, TypeScript, HTML, Vue and Markdown. So they're the ones I'm automatically linting only. So when I save that, if I come over to the header, we can see that that is already giving me a linting error up here saying parsing error unexpected token. So the linter is definitely working, although that's a pretty stupid error, but that's because we haven't got ESlint correctly set up yet. So let's just leave the header open, but it does show that it is actually validating and linting the Vue file for us when we open it, which is exactly what we wanted from this. And we can now see that that ESlint has actually popped up down there. So if I click on that, I can go and look at the ESlint log directly. It just makes that easier to get at. So that's a nice to have. So if I come back over to the terminal, to actually run ESlint, we can use npx ESlint, and then this says everything from the current folder downwards. So all files, all folders, all children of the Nuxt app folder. So that's one option. So we can run that up and that will basically lint absolutely everything and give me 14 problems that it thinks it's got with the linter. The alternative is to use the extra target that we added, the extra script. So we can just npm run lint now, and that will only lint those restricted file types. We can see we've got 14 problems that we need to fix. So let's go and dive in and start looking at how we can fix some of these issues, or at least get rid of some of these problems that the linter is reporting as being problems. So our header component is showing us a problem. So let's go and see what we can do about fixing that. So the first thing that we need to do is install another package into our DevTools, which is the Vue ESlint parser. So let's go and do that. So to add the parser into ESlint, we need to just change the ESlint config and add the ESlint parser in. What we also need to do is add in another package, which is for the Vue ESlinting rules. So that's the ESlint plugin Vue package. And when we've got that installed, we can go and extend the rules that ESlint uses and save that. And we've now seen that the header has decided it's not a problem anymore because it now understands Vue files. So let's move on and run our linting again and see what errors we get now. So if we would just keep picking the top one off as we go. So it's complaining about the ESlint JSON file. Although interestingly, Visual Studio Code isn't complaining about it. So let's just go back to our settings file, and in here, let's add in JSON with comments into there and save that. And now our JSON file is complaining just by virtue of us having it open in Visual Studio Code. So it doesn't like JSON files now. So let's go and add some JSON love into ESlint. Over in our terminal, let's install the ESlint plugin JSON. And inside our ESlint file, let's add some more rules into our rule set to lint the JSON files. So now when we save that, it's now happy, it understands what a JSON file should look like, and that linting error has now gone. So that's JSON files dealt with. So let's just keep hacking away at this process and see what we've got now as our top error. So the top error now is about a markdown file. It doesn't understand markdown files. So let's do the same as we did for JSON. Let's go and add in a linting package for markdown files. You could obviously choose to exclude these, but as this is all part of your code, the more code you're linting, the better your code is going to be at the end result. So we've added that in, so let's do the same and go and add some extra rules in for the markdown files. Save that, and if I now open up that readme file, shouldn't give me any linting errors inside Visual Studio Code. If you're finding this useful, then do consider subscribing to the channel, because there are lots more tips, tricks and tutorials like this one in the pipeline. Run the linter again, and what have we got now? Our top error is about the footer, so let's open up the footer, and it's complaining here about a new line before the closing tag. If I was to go and do that, for instance, and then save it, Prettier is putting that back on that line for me. I'm now stuck in a position where the linter's not happy if I do one thing and Prettier wants to do something else. So what we actually need to go and do is add in the Prettier rules into the linter as well, so that the linter can understand what Prettier is going to do for us. So we add in ESlint config Prettier, and then in the rules we can add as the very last thing in the list the Prettier rules, and now you can see that the linter now understands that Prettier wants to keep that on the same line so it doesn't lint it as an error. So that's good, that's got rid of that one. So let's do our usual and run the linter again and see how many errors we've got now. So we're now down to 4, so that got rid of a shed load of problems. Went from 34 to 4 there, so let's have a look at what errors we've got now. And we've got, I'm going to come back to that define page meta. So component name index should always be a multi-line or multi-part name. So it doesn't like index. So because we have things like the footer, which is 2 parts, it doesn't like index just being on its own. So what we're actually going to do for that is we're going to add some rules in to our linting configuration to switch off that rule, because I don't want to go renaming index. That's valid as far as I'm concerned. So I'm going to turn off the multi-word component names just for the index file, is what this is saying. Clear that and run this linting thing again. We're now down to 3 according to this, and it doesn't know what define page meta is. That's a Nuxt 3 thing. So we need to go and add some Nuxt into this now. So the package that we need to add is this at Nuxt.js ESlint config Typescript. So we'll install that in, and just like we've done with the other rules, we'll come over and we need to add some more rules into the ESlint rules. Now I'm going to add those. I'm going to make sure that Prettier is last, because that's the last thing that should happen, and put those Nuxt rules there. So the order of this is important, as we'll see in a bit. So the Prettier rules I think should always be last, because the formatting of the file is always the last thing that goes on. So let's save that and clear that and run that up again and see if that's got rid of those issues. And there we can see we've got rid of all of our linting problems now, as far as our code base is concerned at the present time anyway. But if I come over to a component, for instance, and inside the script add const, just a variable in there, you can see that I do get a linting problem now, which is around the variable is declared but never used. So we do have some issues that don't exist yet in our code base, but this is a fairly common problem. So this is why I'm showing you this. So the way that we need to get rid of that is to add the TypeScript lint plugin in. So we go and add that one in, and back over in our rules, we need to go and add in the rules for the TypeScript linting as well. So we'll do that after the Nuxt.js linting, and let's save that. And we can see now that our header has now changed from being an error to just being a warning. And this is where I was saying the order is important. So for instance, if I reverse that order and save that, that now becomes an error because the Nuxt rules are taking precedence. I don't necessarily agree that it's an error, but I do like to be warned about it. So hence that's why I put Nuxt first and TypeScript afterwards, because I only want to be warned about those types of issues. So we can leave that in. What I'm also going to do is just add in a console log statement, and we can see that we get a warning for that as well. So that's telling us that we shouldn't really have console log statements. It's not a good thing to leave those in for production code. So that's good that that's already showing us that as well. And if I npm run my lint, I get 2 warnings across my code base. And incidentally, if I want to get rid of those, so if I'm not interested in being told about console logging, for instance, then I can turn that off with that statement. And if I'm not interested about the warning for variables that are declared but unused, then I can turn that off using the no unused vars setting in there. And when I save that, you can see that those warnings have now disappeared. So hence, when I run my linter, I now get a completely clean lint report. ESlint is now happy with my code base across the board. And as I start coding going forwards, it's going to start reporting and telling me on the fly when I'm introducing issues into my code that I can then go and fix. And when I save the file, it's going to automatically fix those for me if it can, if it knows a fix for it. So that's great. I've got 2 helpers there that are helping me lint the code and create better code, and also format it so that it's nicely formatted for other people to read when I check that into my repository. And that's all for free when I save the file. I don't have to do anything extra now that I've set all this up. My code base is now good to go for me to move forward with some development. And with that said, that's all I've got for this video. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.